Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of Power Driven Diesel. So today, as you can see, we don't have a Dodge behind us. We actually have a 6.0 Power Stroke. This is Lonnon's truck. I'll have him explain a little bit about it.
It is. I was looking for a truck that I could use just to tow, either a fifth wheel or trailers or whatever. And I figured because of that, I wanted a dually. So we found a dually, came out of Phoenix, $4,500 for this beast. It's not immaculate, but I wanted a truck that I didn't care if it got a little scratched. And so it's a 6.0 Power Stroke diesel. We don't know what's wrong with it other than it's got some issues. We got it to start once. From that point, we haven't really done anything from there. And so I just wanted a truck that we can use to go to New York if we had to for any reason.
We know it has bad head gaskets. It is swapping fluid. Well, it's actually just pushing coolant oil into the coolant, not opposite way around, at least as far as we can tell. We do know it has a bad ficum. We had to rob mine to make sure that it was actually see if it would run. But as far as the baseline goes, we know nothing about the history of this truck, and the ultimate goal is to be able to make it reliable, something we could just hop into and drive to the East Coast and back if we had to. So, Lon, if you want to pop the hood, that way at least everybody can kind of see what we're going to be dealing with here.
We got wires hanging everywhere. You got wires holding up parts. It's got some work ahead of it, but I think we're ready to take on this challenge so that you guys can know how to fix these things.
Let's get to work. Alrighty, so when working on a 6.0, it's really nice that we got kind of 4 basic areas we're going to be spending time in, which makes it a lot of fun if you got a couple of buddies that want to come and help you. For me, pulling a cab off is always a lot of fun, and guys always want to come help. So we're going to be focusing on the passenger side of the truck, then we'll move over to the driver's side. But before we do any of that, we actually start in the cab. We have to remove the rear seat to be able to get to the body bolts. And then we also focus underneath the truck, of course, removing tranny linkage, emergency brake cable. We'll get more into detail on that one because it's a little involved. You wouldn't think so, but it's fun. And so we'll just kind of go from there. So let's get started in the cab of the truck. All right, we're going to start off with removing the rear seat. It's pretty straightforward. We've got 4 bolts in the front. We got 3 bolts in the rear. So let's just get to work. You can generally just get them out with an impact. I'll just throw them up in the cup holder. For the back, you're going to need a pretty long extension. They are an 18mm, but you will need a deep socket. So clearly that's not the right one.
So what you're trying to do is you're trying to get that long extension through the back. And it's not picking me up very well. I'm probably going to do it.
So what we're trying to do is we're actually putting the extension all the way down next to the seat. And you can just feel the bolt down here. The seat is a little bit misleading. You know how there's those 4 bolts in the front? There's only 3 in the back. There's 2 on this main seat and just 1 on the big seat on the very end. So don't forget about it. But it's just the 3. Okay guys, it doesn't go straight down. You gotta kind of force it over onto the socket a little bit sometimes. Alrighty, as you guys can see, there's this plastic little tab that keeps the seatbelt in. Some trucks have it, some don't, or some just never had it put back in after the dealer pulled the cab off.
And in this case, it's an elastic tab.
Alright everybody, as you can see, after all this work, we're just trying to get to these bolts right here on both sides. So, it's hard to tell from the footage, but yes, those are 2 different size head bolts. The driver's side runs a 24mm, the passenger side runs a 21. I have no idea why. It's the way they do it. It's stupid. That's the way they do it. And if I were a properly equipped shop, I would have an impact to pull these out, but my impact is currently broken, so I get to do it by hand. Alrighty guys, as you can see, the bolt just sits there and spins. Best way I've seen how to fix this, grab yourself a hammer and whack it. So that's just indexed and then it should pop out. Go. unless you're really unlucky. More work to do. Alrighty guys, we're gonna take the rear seat out. This is how I used to do every one of my builds, but just recently I found out I could keep it in, but it's really easy just to pull it out, and especially it'll make filming easier so you guys can all see what we're doing. This is not a paid promotion, but if you have some type of PV blaster or penetrating lube of any sort, spray it on your bolts before you try to do the job. Otherwise, you'll end up in the situation we are, with a bolt that's stuck and just spinning and stripped out. There are no bolts that hold these in, they just clip out. And then next, I'm going to take a pair of pliers. There's a Christmas tree clip on a bolt right on a clip right here. Just get the pliers right behind it, pull them out. And then this has two clips that hold it in. Just tug back, as you can see. And then we just get to our little cover right there. This one should actually just pop right through the floor. Alright everybody, that's it to the interior. There's no reason to go back inside here, so now we can actually get to the let's get dirty stuff. So let's move to the front end. Alrighty everybody, so like we said in the beginning of this video, this truck is not perfect. So we do have a couple of things. The batteries, cables are not tight. The batteries are totally loose in here. So what we're going to start with first is just getting the batteries out. And then we're going to get the air filter out, the expansion chamber out. But before we do any of this, we actually need to drain the coolant. So let's hop underneath there. We'll get that draining. And then while we're doing that, while that's draining, we'll be able to get all of this stuff out. We do need to make sure that we disconnect this battery cable, because this is going to stay with the truck. This is going to stay with the cab. This is going to go with the truck. So this side goes with cab. This side goes with the frame and the engine. Next, we need to remove the battery tray. So there's just two bolts. They're I think they're a 13mm head, and then there's two more bolts up against the fender. The reason we removed the battery tray was so we could get to all of the electrical connectors a little bit easier. And I'm sure a lot of you guys have aftermarket stuff on your truck. Make sure that when you're looking at it, does it go with the cab or does it go with the frame? So in most cases like headlights, you don't have to worry about, but just be aware of those type of things. Now if your truck is an 05 or newer, they came with these plastic intake tubes. On the 04 and earlier, they came with steel ones. So you can, on this one, you can just loosen up the two connections, pop the hose off, loosen up on the bottom, and just rotate it out of the way. You don't actually have to remove it. Alrighty, these bolts here are both 15mm. What we're gonna do, instead of having to re-bleed the brakes on 05 and newer, you can just pull the whole ABS and master cylinder off as a unit and throw it on top of the engine. Don't have to bleed anything. So we're gonna be removing those. We're also removing these connections for the hydro boost. There's 3 of them you need to get rid of. And then all of this assembly is just gonna go right over here.
And we do have a couple of electrical connectors that are going to hinder us in getting this thing off. And just so you guys know, we're not bending any lines here. Everything is on a loose mount. It's got stainless steel brake lines in between it all. It's designed to do this. Okay, now get down to the nitty gritty of what's going on here. Of course, we pulled off this big electrical connector. Now we just need to see what things go to the engine, which would be this main connector here. What things stay with the chassis. Well, actually with the body, this connector stays. This connector goes with the frame. Most of these connectors come undone here, but not all of them. That's why I told you to go ahead and look at everything. Okay, and then if we follow our wires, you can see this is actually your controls for your four-wheel drive. If your truck's two-wheel drive, you don't have to worry about these. So we need to make sure that we route all of our electrical cables around those pieces. And then you can see here, these are also ones that run down to the chassis. And we've got a couple more lines here that we also need to disconnect. And what I like to do is just push them through on the other side of the steering shaft so I know what goes with the cab and what doesn't. The more clear you can make things when you're pulling the cab off, the easier it is to not worry about ripping wires off or anything. Okay, now with all of our electrical connectors out of the way, we can easily get, so this is a vent line that goes back to your power steering fluid, and we can also disconnect this line here, which goes down to your steering box. Should I take that back? You didn't need to pull this off. But it certainly will make getting to this line easier. The reason that line didn't need to come off is that goes to the reservoir, which stays with the truck, and stays with the cab. Okay, as you guys can see here, we've got a heater hose that comes off of this is your expansion tank, where the expansion tank connects. So we need to remove this coupler right here. These connections are extremely fragile, especially when they're old. If you break one, sometimes it's your fault, sometimes it's not. Sometimes they just break. So just be careful of them. Most auto parts stores now stock them. Next we have a powered steering hose that connects to the bottom of the powered steering pump. I generally like to disconnect it at the reservoir. It's just a lot easier. But you need to make sure you have a bucket underneath it. This is going to make a mess. So we're going to pop that off now. Okay, all we have next is to remove this little plastic cover we need to take off of this hose right here. This goes to your tranny cooler, power steering cooler. And then there's also going to be a 13mm bolt here that holds the steering shaft in. And maybe they are 20 mil.
Okay, you probably say that's right to the right. Okay.
Hey guys, it's a 20mm wrench. This will generally fight you all the way out. Before you get done pulling it out, make sure you clean everything off. This is a hydraulic system. If it gets contaminants in it, you'll be fighting issues for a long time. I really hope Eric puts in here several minutes later.
Few moments later.
Just a good little suggestion. Try and push this shaft up as far as it'll go. That way it doesn't hang up on anything. And then remove everything as much as you can around it. Now everything is either on the body side or the engine side, at least as much as possible. The brake lines are a little misleading, but this is all we have to deal with. We also need to remember our ground. That goes with the engine. And then what we have left is to remove a radiator hose. There is one more connector down here that I totally forgot about, and I do about every time. It's for your fog lights. If you don't have fog lights, you don't have to worry about it. And yes, they almost always fight you this much. Alrighty, now we got to remove these bolts for the radiator hold down. The reason we have to do that, because we have to get this cable out of here. Just kind of set them on there so that way it keeps the radiator in. Don't actively tighten anything up. Before we go to the passenger side, this connector usually comes in over here and connects. Make sure you don't forget this. But being that mine is this basket case, I don't have to worry about that. Hey everybody. Okay, on this side, the first thing you need to do before we ever start this job, you either need to bring it to a shop and have the AC discharged or figure out some way to do that. So we've already had that done. As soon as that's done, then we need to just remove the batteries. They're the very first thing to come out. Then we're going to remove this line, this heater line. There's a ground strap right here. There's a ground strap right here next to the battery. And then we've got a vacuum line. And last but not least, the starter cable. Oh, this is just the starter solenoid. So let's get to work. This truck is a dual alternator truck, so we'll have 2 leads. Most trucks are not. And just like the other side, you're going to try and route everything as tight to the engine as you can. One thing that you'll see is missing here is just this one boost tube. That's the very first thing I generally remove, but clearly, I mean, this is straightforward. You could get that out. One of the things I like to do is just shove a paper towel into your receiver dryer. We also have this vacuum line that needs to come off. You can see it just fell off by us throwing the lines over there. So this ground strap we need to route over to the engine. Before we get too much in a bind here and you forget what you're doing, you need to get this heater hose off. The heater hose goes with the body. Alrighty guys, being that this is a dual alternator truck, I forgot about this connection down here against the passenger side fender. We also need to disconnect it. Okay, we do have one more thing to undo. We need to undo the map sensor. So there's two ways to go about it. You can grab the whole map sensor, remove these 3 bolts, remove the connector and throw it on the engine, or you can just pull the hose off the engine. All I have left is this vacuum line. That's pretty much it for right here. We do have an AC line that we need to get underneath the cowl. Alrighty, one thing you need to do before you get totally done up here is don't leave any tools up here or up on the cowl, because you'll forget about them. I've forgotten about several tools, and then you're like, where did all my tools go? And they're sitting right up here when the cab's up there. So all we have left now is just take the cab bolts off. So we've got them right here, so on either side. They're an 18 millimeter, and what I'll do is I'll just leave the nuts down next to the bolts, down next to the studs, because they won't get lost. The cab's only going to go up and then back down. So as far as we're concerned here, we're done. Now we're going to go underneath.
All right, guys. So what we're doing here is we put a pair of vice grips back there to hold this so it's nice and loose. We're going to try and pry this open with a screwdriver. That's how I've done it in the past, and we'll see if it works for me. Basically what you're trying to do is get it to split apart far enough that you can just slide this end out. And that's it. So you see this right here. So this is what sits up inside of this piece right here. And so you got to get that part apart. I used first a small pick and then a much larger one to try and force it out, and there she goes. But the screwdriver, you'll see I had to kind of really work it out a little bit to get to spread a little bit so it was a little looser so I could get it moved around. But that part's done. The next part is right here. We've got to take that out. Usually isn't that bad. A pair of like needle-less pliers, and it just comes right out. And then that goes up with the cab. All right, guys, so right here, we've got ABS lines, or not lines, but the ABS electrical fittings. They're gonna come off on both sides. I'm only gonna show you the driver's side one. Little dirt in there. That one's good. All right, here's the other ABS side. I decided to show it to you. No different than the other one. Push it in, pull it out. That's it. Starting out with a not great shot, but here's how you pull off the linkage for the transmission. That was it.
And you just remove those 2 bolts. Do not remove that. Like, do not remove this. It'll screw everything up. Just pull the 2 bolts out of the transmission.
Which 2 bolts? Okay, and there's one above that?
Yeah.
All right, so you see this ground strap right there. That's the other thing on the passenger side that's got to come off. It's an 8 millimeter or a 5/16. Just like that, she's done. All right, guys, so these plastic pieces right here, Baron's pointing to, there's one, hold on, let me get that one up high. There's one right there. And then you've got all the ones down along the side, and there's another one on the other side up top, just like this one right here. So he's got a pair of angled needle nose pliers.
You can do this with the body panel pullers if you want. I've just found these are the most convenient tool for me. So the reason we have to pull this off, it's actually attached to the scratch bar. Ugh.
Dirt in the eye.
Oily water.
Oh, even better.
Ugh. Next, we're removing the lower radiator hose. If this truck was not so ghetto, there would be another clip right here that you had to disconnect it from the fan shroud. But this doesn't have a lower fan shroud, so that's not here. That did a really good job of missing the bucket. Okay, next we gotta remove the tranny cooler line. So it's actually just gonna be this one and this one. We leave this one in place.
Do we need any special tools?
So, yes, we do need a special tool. The only special tool to actually remove a cab on one of these. Only on the 05s and newer. You need, here's this kit.
Okay.
From like Snap-on, I think is where I got it. Actually, I had it upside down.
What an idiot! Oh, what a loser! Good!
And we need the orange connector one. And guys, most of the time, you should probably spray some PB Blaster or something in here.
Like a pro.
And yes, they always come out that hard. Alrighty guys, you always make sure you double check everything again. You look at it all, and it's always good to have two guys while you're doing this. That way one can be inspecting everything, run around to either side, and you'll see this, while the other guy's running the lift. So you're gonna go up, and if somebody says stop, you stop.
Ready?
Go ahead.
Going?
Yeah, keep going.
Mine was getting hung up. Good?
Clear on my side.
Clear my side up, see you yet. Alright guys, this is a fantastic time if you have a pressure washer to go to town. And if it's easy to get it out of the bay.
Yeah. Hi everybody, we're back to day 2. We pressure washed it, we've cleaned everything. So now we're gonna get to the nitty gritty. As you can see, I'm looking up at the camera so you guys can see all of this that's going on. We're focusing on the top first. But before we do anything, we're gonna take this clutch fan off and we're gonna use that using this little fancy tool, and it'll remove the alternator and then oil filter housing, turbo, and then intake manifold. These fans are a standard thread, so you don't have to worry about going backwards or anything with them. Alrighty everybody, sometimes you'll struggle with the fan clutch, as you can see that we are. I've got some penetrating lube on there right now. We're going to move to other stuff. So we're going to remove the turbo, the oil filter housing, and then hopefully we'll come back to the fan. We've got the exhaust manifold to up pipes, so we're just going to remove the 2 bottom bolts here. Only the same 2 over here. It's a 10mm head with a 13mm nut. This is a really good time to start grabbing some Ziploc bags, keeping yourself organized.
Two 10s right there. 10 millimeter right here. You're going to use a wrench or a ratchet wrench. There's another 10 millimeter back here, and one over here looks like. And I'll find that when I get to that side. Yeah, like I said, you got that. Third bolt usually goes right here, but wasn't in there. So now that we've got that out, we're going to move on to the oil filter housing. Okay, so we're back to the front, and we're going to do the zip ties. We're going to put these on these lines right here. And the reason we're doing that is so that these nuts, when they come off, they don't go whoop, right down into that bisque around down there. We'll go ahead and we'll trim those off a little bit later. But there's 3 of them. This is the first one. Second one is right here. I didn't do that one. I'm just gonna, same thing. So here is the last one we're doing that. Zip tie to. Again, all we're doing is making sure that those are not going anywhere. 21 there. Okay, so we've got an 18 there. We've got a 21 there. And this back side, I'm going to guess, is also an 18. That is correct. And actually, these look like they're probably standard. Let's grab an 11/16 and see how she fits on there. All right, so it is standard. 11/16, and then that other one will be 13/16. It is. So we're on 11/16 here, 13/16 here, 11/16 back there. I'm gonna go ahead and loosen these up. All right, now we're back to the passenger side of the engine, where we are going to be working on, and you can stand on this right down here. It's braced for the bumper. We're going to be going after these bolts right here, and they are a T45 Torx. We've got 1, 2, 3 of them to get this out. So we'll just proceed from here. 1. And now, that thing will come right. Sure. Oh, I did forget one. We've got this line back here real quick. It is a 3/4, so again for this we've got a 18 or 11/16, 11/16, a 13/16, and right here is a 3/4. Pull that banjo bolt. I'm gonna grab that second sealing washer that dropped. We're gonna put it back on, and when we get this thing out, we're just gonna screw it back in, and we don't lose them. Kind of pulls out nice and slowly. I'm gonna put that back in there so we don't lose it, and we're gonna put this in a safe space. Okay, guys. So at the moment, this fan clutch is stuck on here pretty good. We might have to do some extraordinary measures to get it off, but we're gonna pull this fan shroud off. It is, on most vehicles, 4 15mm bolts all the way around. There's one here, one over here, one down on each side, and they just come out pretty quickly and easy. You can see down in there. It's back inside. Looks like I need an extension a little bit. That comes off. All right, the next bolt we've got to get out is this 10mm right here. Holds in this fuel line. I'm just gonna take that out real quick. Make sure it's good. Put it with our other bolts. This is where that bag that Baron was saying was handy. You kind of just stick them all in, just like so. I'm going to set this right here for me right now so that I can easily get to it. Put the rest of my bolts in. The next one we're going to be taking off, the alternator. Some people might argue the correct way of doing this is to use the belt tensioner. For me, it's just as easy to pull the alternator off and just let the belt kind of flip forward. So that's exactly what we're going to do. We're going to hold. And that's it. Quick, painless. Don't get your knuckles jammed by something. Make sure you put that nut back on. We're going to go ahead and get this wiring harness off of there. Easiest way to do that, grab yourself a screwdriver of some sort. Flatheads work pretty dang good. And you can see right here, we're just going to push on that and yank up. These kind of just pop off. Same thing here. Push, yank. A little tighter down in these quarters, but no different. It's tight. Pop it. And the last one right here. Alrighty. We're going to take this off. Find anything else. Looks like we've got a couple extra wires. So that'll just go to the side. This one and...
Which one? So that goes down to the AC compressor. So really I just throw the wiring harness.
this direction.
Well, actually just kind of leave it where it's at. Or you throw it over the front. Did you pull the clips out?
Of what?
That would probably mean no. The injector harness.
Not on that side, no. Did they all just pop off?
Yeah. Well, there's two that don't have little clips on them.
There's two of us working on it now. Go ahead and unplug that IPR line, and that is a fantastic little ground there. Did you get it?
Nope, I broke it.
Oh. Ah, it was
Don't over tighten those because they suck. You have to re-put an eyelet on them every time. Okay guys, what you're going to want to do is you want to scribe all the spots where you have a stud. So I just take that with a pick, I draw a line in the manifold, so when you go to wash the manifold, you can see where it's at.
And now, we can go ahead and pull it apart. We don't remove these two. This right here I gotta loosen up so I can get it off. So that it'll just pull off. Alright guys, so we're going to remove these bolts off of the valve cover, and then that gets us down so we can get all the bolts for the head. Down here you'll see kind of gooey ones. Maybe you can't see them, but there's a 10 millimeter there, there's 10 millimeter here, one there, and there, and one there. There, they have to come out too. They're technically head bolts. Ooh, it's had water in there for a little while.
Gee, that's rust.
So this here is a Torx T30. Just needed to give it a little bit of persuasion.
You're leaking.
All right, we're gonna zip that dual alternator off. Hopefully it works just like the other one does. I guess we'll find out. We gotta pop that out, and then these gotta come out. 1, 2, and number 3. Let's see. Yeah, pretty much the same way. You don't have to do the tensioner. Okay, so as I was about to switch to the other side, like I said, I noticed that when this alternator comes off, I've got to take this bracketry off so that I can get this head off without a big headache. So we're going to go ahead and do that real quick. This came out pretty good. And that there. There we go. That comes off.
Either way, not a bad deal.
No, not a bad deal at all.
Or it's another one.
Another project.
Yep.
All right, so that bracket is now off, and we can get that head off a lot easier for the next go. This is a 17 millimeter. We can pull it now, we can pull it later, but it's got to be pulled. All right, so like he just said, we're going to be putting a regulated return on these. Blah, blah, blah. We're going to be putting a regulated return on this engine, so that line will not be reused. All right, guys, so quick tip on getting the harness out for the wire or for the injectors. 18 millimeter, 12-point socket, and kind of just push on it, and it'll push right out. Unless this one's too fat.
What you're doing is you're getting on either ear of the tab.
Oh.
You're getting it here and here.
All right. So another Baron quick tip from Lonnon. Through Lonnon. Via Lonnon. Anyway. He says blow this whole thing out because once this all comes off, all that crap's going to end up down in your engine block. That's no bueno. So.
First, we're going to want to remove all the 10s
The 10s.
from the intake side of the head.
Okay.
So there's one on each side of the port, and then we've got a 13 just on the inside of the rocker box. So this is different for depending on the year of engine you have. Some of them have a bolt in each one, and they're 10 millimeters. Some of them only have a couple of 13s. Some of them don't have anything at all. So it really just depends on the year you have. Even some of them, if you look down at the bottom of the head where the glow plug harness is at, they'll even have bolts here, but on the later models they don't. And you'll even see that the holes are even casted over. You can't even put a bolt there. So it just depends on what configuration you get.
That's what I thought.
No beans.
I mean, if we had a real impact, these McKees are great, don't get me wrong. They just don't have any juice. They just don't have the
Cojones.
cojones. Good word, good word. So there's 5 of them here. 4. There's a little count for you there. No?
No, totally. You're not the one that's bleeding.
Yeah, I'm not bleeding. All right. Those are right.
Okay.
I guess we probably want a new bag for those.
I mean, of all the things that are annoying about this XO, there are a lot of things that are very nice about it.
Like they thought through that? That's like freaking smart. All right, 10 mils down.
Yeah, the 18's come out.
Give me 18 6-point. We have one. I already stripped it. Already stripped a 12.10 millimeter.
Alrighty guys, to give a quick recap, we kind of forgot the camera was off, and so we were just loosening up head bolts. We removed all of the bolts on the intake side of the head. There are 2 bolts that sit just on the top of the rocker arms here, and then we're using an 18mm socket to loosen up all the bolts. These bolts are under about 225 foot-pounds of torque, guesstimating. I mean, it's like 150 foot-pounds and 90 degrees is what the factory put them at. So we're going to be setting them when we put new head bolts in, well, head studs, we're going to be setting them at 225. So right now, Lonnon's gotten all those broken loose. Now we'll be able to pop out all of the head bolts. And first we'll take off the rocker box, which is this aluminum box, and then we'll take off the head.
And there's the rocker box out.
There's no real critical need to pull those off in the same order. As you can see, the way that they're put on, the long end, so there's a round end and then the long end is facing up. I think it kind of depends on which side you're dealing with. No, this is the way I usually put it on. That one was put on backwards. So, yep, so you can just kind of put these off. It don't matter what order they go in, as much as everybody in the world will tell you there is. Alrighty guys, I'm pulling out the glove plugs now, just because I know it's going to be easier now, just because it's easy to get to. And we're going to probably set these on their face as soon as we get them off. We'll pull the exhaust manifold off once we get it on a bench. You have a little better access that way.
Oh, looks like we didn't drain it up. Well, look at that. You can see right where she was leaking.
We ordered head gaskets for an 18 because this is an early model 06. And early model 06s, in my experience, have always been 18mm dowels. Late model 06s are all 20mm all the way up until 2010. These engines came in the Echo lines until 2010, Econo lines. And so now we've got to get different head gaskets that work.
Okay guys, first thing we've got to do is we've got to make sure we remove these mounts. These 2 mounts right here, they are for the FICM. Underneath there are the number 12s all the way around to pull off the valve cover. That was a size 10 for those. Everything else all the way around the outside is a size 12. Just leave it on. Oh, there she goes. Baron was saying most of the time when he sees that, you can tell it's been sitting a while. Just some sort of condensation ends up underneath those valve covers and rust those. These are all the same size bolt, so you don't need to make sure you get them in the right order. Again, back in the left side bag. You're going to take a screwdriver and you're just going to kind of pry up on it. And then it'll come right off. Make sure you got somewhere to place it, and you got to be quick because the oil is going to just start pouring out of there. Just like that. You can see the oil looks pretty good here. We have a couple of spots that are kind of gross. But that's probably from the oil when we did get it running, and it just mixing with the oil and the condensation that was probably under this already. These are a T45, if I remember correctly. Yes, they are. that one. All right, now it's for the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 on each side of the 18 millimeters. 18 millimeters. For this, I'm going to use a breaker bar and an 18. Yesterday they gave me a little bit of rocker box holes off. Pull push rods, and we do have push rods available for these. And we were debating whether we're going to use them on this one or not. We'll find out when we put it back together. We'll let you know. From there, I want to make sure everything is out of the way. Next, I apologize, head's not ready to come up yet. I'm gonna pop these out. Those are glow plugs. This is 10 millimeter. Should be coming out rather quickly. This truck is a 2006 and does have the 20 millimeter dowels. Next thing we're gonna move, I'm taking off this stuff because we gotta get to the high pressure oil pump. Okay, so this drain tube here just pulls out. Pedestal comes off. I do not have a big enough wrench, so we're going to use an adjustable wrench. And this thing just screws right out after you get it. The piece we're going to replace. And there is our high pressure oil pump. Alright, so we've got to remove this right here. This is where the oil cooler sits. Alright guys, the last thing we're going to be pulling is this oil pump here because we are replacing it. It's a high pressure oil pump. It's a T45. We're just going to let it drain there for a little bit.
Alrighty, so we're going to start off with building component by component. This is very similar to transmission building. You build all the components and then you assemble it. So first we're going to start off with the oil cooler. That is this device right here. So underneath here there is, of course, a big old aluminum block. It has different passages just like a radiator to allow coolant and oil to flow through it. What happens with these is the
There's lots of theories out there. The one I believe is the casting sand inside the blocks was left over, basically ended up plugging up the coolant passages of the oil cooler. It's a big issue with these. So we're going to start off with tearing this apart. You don't need a lot of tools to do this. You really just need a T27, a T30, and a T45. The T30 is going to be used for the majority of the small bolts, and then the T45, of course, the big bolts. The only reason you need the T27 is to remove this bolt right here to be able to get rid of this stem. That way we can replace the gaskets in here. The bolts are just kind of randomly placed all over this. So you will be using T45s and T30s pretty much simultaneously. So what we've got in here is we have two 13mm headed nuts, and then on the bottom side of this there are two more 13mm bolts. They're just right here. Okay, next what we're going to do is take our vise, we'll widen up the jaws, get it just wide enough to be able to span the cooler, and then you're going to take a 21 or 22 or 23mm socket, and we're just going to press on it on these. We're going to hammer these out. You're just going to walk it back and forth. And that's your oil cooler. Some of them have these little holes in them. The one we're installing doesn't. Most aftermarket good ones that I've seen don't have these little holes. So, really up to what you find. Okay, the next thing I would suggest is to go clean this stuff all off. Go grab a can of brake clean, throw it in a parts washer. Make sure it's nice and clean. Clean off your bench as well, and clean off all the other parts that you can. The cleaner we have everything, the longer it should last, the easier it goes back together. Nice and clean. Alrighty guys, I think we're ready to start reassembly. What we've got here is our new oil cooler, all of our parts, and then what we've done is we've cleaned up all of our little parts, housings and stuff. We've cleaned all this stuff up. One thing that I did want to make a note of, this is always filled full of coolant, and what happens sometimes is in here will become very, very rough. And so you need to come in here with like a piece of emery cloth or really fine grit sandpaper, clean this out. Same thing here on this one. So make sure that these are really, really clean. No real imperfections on the surface. They don't have to be like spotless, but just make sure they're clean. So first thing we got to do is install our O-rings on the new cooler. Having some picks here is very crucial, so that way you can get everything out a little easier. That we'll put on last. center, screen. Okay, so we're gonna have these two thin O-rings are gonna go in the cover. And you got a couple of different sizes of fatty ones. So they're gonna stack on top of each other just like that. Right here. One thing I recommend doing is grabbing a little bit of oil. Pouring it into either the lid or just anything you have around, or if you have a little oil can. That way you can lubricate the oil on the O-rings before you put them in. Okay, that is all ready to go. Let's get our O-rings put in here. Okay, so what you guys are gonna see here is that there is an O-ring here, an O-ring here, and then of course you're gonna see this O-ring right here. Something you might miss is there's actually a bolt head right here that also has an O-ring on it. So we're also gonna remove this as well. You guys can kind of see the discoloration. Pop it out with your thumb, and then you can see there's that little O-ring. You can see I am throwing the O-rings away as we go, so that way we don't confuse anything. The only one we're going to keep is there is that smaller O-ring that goes right here. You can confuse it for this one, so I'm going to hang on to it for just a minute while I'm trying to find it. Spray this down a little bit more. Okay, I did not lubricate these O-rings. We want them to stay in here to the best of our ability, so do not lubricate them. All they do is rest right here. Okay, we've got two O-rings very similar in size. You're just going to grab the one that you removed. You're going to match it up. Which of course is this one. And we'll throw that one away. And then we'll remove the one off of our little bolt. Now this O-ring, the little small one that goes onto this bolt, I would recommend lubricating. Sorry guys, it's really hard to show you, but I was just trying to get that O-ring on using the pick. And then we'll push it back down into place. Okay, next what we're going to do, we're going to assemble our two halves. So remember, be aware of these O-rings. I have had them fall out in the past, and you do not want to do this job again. And then you'll just force it down just like that. It does require a fair bit of pressure, but just walk it down. You don't want any sudden movements because that can cause these O-rings, the ones that are just pushed in, to fall out. Next, what we're going to do is get our two nuts on top, two bolts on the bottom installed. Okay. I am not setting torque with the torque iron with that impact. I'm just getting them ran down. These are supposed to be tightened to 17 foot-pounds. So you'll see it's already there, ready to go for us. that, next we need to install this gasket. So sometimes there might be some residual material. Just go in here with your pick and clean it out. And then we'll just start placing our O-rings in. What you want to do is you just kind of want to set it in place. And then you don't want to like walk it all the way around with your fingers. You want to press it down in a few places. And then you go back over it and make sure that it's totally seated. It's not so critical for this gasket on top, but it is very critical for this blue gasket when we go to install it. Sometimes it takes a couple of tries to get these bolts to walk in. So these are actually self-tapping bolts. They don't drill and tap these from the factory. They do it with just the bolts. I've gotten a couple of new assemblies from Ford, and they really just run them down with an impact. So it is fairly normal to see material on the bolts. Okay, for these larger T45 torques, they are going to be torqued to 22 foot-pounds. As you can see. Okay, as many of you heard, you didn't hear this one click. That's not totally uncommon. Just don't over tighten anything. We're just going to leave that one the way it is. Like I said, these are not drilled and tapped from the factory. They just use the bolts to do it. Sometimes the aluminum isn't the best casting. So I'm just going to leave that alone. Next, we're just going to install this one little water housing to the EGR valve. Sometimes take a little bit of persuasion. Get rid of our last O-ring here. And then we'll get all of our T30 torques installed. And then for our last torque, we're going to bring it to 89 inch-pounds. And then the last O-ring to replace is going to be the oil filter housing O-ring. At least the last O-ring to replace on top. Okay, now for the fun side. This O-ring, we just need to kind of get it positioned into place. We've gotten all the little bends and everything in place. Now we're going to start pushing it down. We're going to do this all the way around it. You're going to check a couple of times, because if this gasket rolls over, you're going to be fixing an oil leak. Okay, now just go around it and finish sealing everything up. And that's it for this component. So she's ready to go back on the truck. Okay guys, we're back at the engine. So this is where the oil cooler goes, of course high pressure oil pump. First thing we want to do here is we want to try and clean up all of our surfaces. We want to get all the old residual oil out of here and also out of here. And if you had a contaminated oiling system like we did, you're going to want to blow out as much of the oil as you can. So there's a couple of orifices in here. Just come in here with an air gun and blow them out. Just don't forget, this is where the oil comes out of, or else you'll have a big old mess on your wall. Something I do want to point out is the factory does use silicone on the very back of the case to when they bolt down the pump, high pressure pump cover. They put it right down here on these back edges, just right where two gaskets meet. So that's how we just need to scrape that off, and then we'll put some new ones down. Oftentimes in this part of the valley, there'll be a bunch of dirt and other stuff built up. While I was prepping the surfaces for the heads, I already cleaned most of this off. But one of the best things you can do is when you're cleaning all of this out, you take your air gun, you actually blow out your hole. And you do that to all of them, and it'll help pull up all that oil that was in there. So here in the oil cooler housing, what we want to do is we want to push all the old oil out. If you've got a contaminated oiling system, again, just like we did. If you don't worry about this. You do need to clean this out, get all the old oil out as best you can, but don't stress it too much. So you just want to get all the material out, but really especially in this galley where you're going to see a filter goes right down in, you want to make sure that's really clean because that's the filtered oil that is sent to the high pressure pump. Okay, this is all prepped, ready to clean and ready to go. We really don't need to worry about much more on this. For the most part, these are all O-ring fit surfaces, so they don't require a ton of cleaning. It's really just a silicone on the back. Okay, so now since our surfaces are all prepped and ready to go, we need to grab our new parts. So here we've got our new high pressure oil pump. And everything's still on it. The nice thing about these new pumps is that they already come with this oil connector fitting already installed. This used to be a Ford factory recall. What would happen is the old fitting would actually unscrew and back out and cause a high pressure oil leak. It's nice that they installed this for us now. Okay, we're gonna set that off to the side. We're gonna grab our bag of goodies. So in here, these are gonna come with every gasket, bolt, and fitting you're gonna need for the installation of this high pressure pump, which is really nice because the old hardware is not bad, but the fact that they supply new stuff is really nice. What we're looking for is this little yellow O-ring. So we need that one. We also need this really skinny back O-ring. So that is going to go right here in the housing, right where the oil feed tubes go to supply oil to the heads. Make sure that that sits in there really nice. We're going to install our little O-ring there. Now it's time for the pump. Okay, first we're actually going to grab our two 8mm and we're going to install them in our oil rail. Because this oil rail does have the ability to move back and forth a little bit, so we gotta get it lined up before we permanently mount down the pump. Okay, we're just gonna get those started, and now we're going to get our 3 bolts which are supplied. Alrighty, so what we've got is we just need to tighten down these bolts using a T45 Torx. Okay, next we're gonna torque these to 34 foot-pounds. So and next, we're going to tighten up the oil feed lines. We're going to torque those 89 inch-pounds. Okay, next, we're going to install this blue O-ring on the pump. It'd be best if you coat this with a little bit of oil, that way the housing can slip over it really easily. Okay, next we're going to install our gasket. So you'll notice with this gasket that it actually has a side that sticks down just a little bit further. That is where we're going to put our silicone, but of course that part of the gasket needs to be facing up when you're installing it on the cover, on the pump cover. Okay, next we're going to use just a little bit of silicone. We're going to put a dab of it right where the rear timing case meets the block. Okay, now we just need to install our 10 bolts. Okay, next we're just going to install our 8 bolts. You don't need to worry about any thread sealant or anything on these. Sometimes 12-point sockets don't like to bite those. Now we just need to install our IPR, and this is ready to go. Okay, the next thing we have to install is this screen. So it's going to be placed in the oil filter and oil cooler housing. And like I said, you want to make sure that the area underneath this screen is absolutely clean, because it's what feeds your high pressure oil pump. After we've done this, we now need to put about 1 to 2 quarts of oil in here. Reason we want to do this now is because if you don't do it now, it's going to take that much longer to prime your oiling system. When you go to do your initial startup. Because this bath right here is what feeds this. And next, we just want to make sure that our gasket is totally in place. Okay, now just take your bolts, put them all in, and just get them all started, run them down with an impact, and these will torque to 20 foot-pounds. Okay, that's it for this center section until we get the heads on. Alright everybody, I wanted to go over with you the rest of the performance parts, the other parts we're going to be installing on this truck that are going to be new. So we're going to start off with, of course, new heads. So we brought our heads to the machine shop, found that they were cracked. I found in my experience this happens about 50% of the time. I mean, you get them good sometimes, you get them bad other times. It's just the nature of the beast. They'll be cracked through an exhaust seat or from the exhaust valve to the intake valve or to the injector. So that is something you need to be preparing for if you're planning on doing this job, is having these heads checked. That is very critical. So we do have a new set of heads. We've also got new performance valve springs on it. That should help us at the higher RPM levels. This is going to be a tow truck. It's going to spend a fair bit of time at that 3,000 to 4,000 RPM range. So we wanted to upgrade those. We've also got, to match those, new performance push rods. These are our stage 1 6.0 push rod. Many of you have seen the push rods on 6.0 Power Strokes. They're not exactly beefy, I'll say. But to go along with all of this, to clamp those heads down, of course we need head studs. We would not do this any other way. But we are going with the OptiTorque Torque Masters. What we have learned in our experience is these bolts have a much higher clamping force than other studs on the market. We're very impressed with these, and they cost about the same as what is out there already. So guys, get yourself some of these. They're amazing. We usually say these are a good in-betweener stud. If you're comparing it to an ARP 2000 to 625, this is the right in the middle. They're a great stud for guys who are looking for a little bit more performance or want the best bang for their buck. That's the OptiTorque Torque Masters. So moving this way, we've also got some up pipes from MBRP. So these already come with a high performance heat coating on them. They're really, really nice. I mean, when you look at the build quality, these are really nice. The reason we're replacing these, in my experience, the bellows on these is a huge failure point. So we want to get this out of the way so we don't ever have to worry about it going down the road. We've also got our performance boot kit. So that comes with all the boots you're going to need to install, replace all the boots, especially the troublesome one that comes right off the turbo. So this little boot will be a lifesaver in many situations. Okay, moving this way. We've got, of course, our tuner. This is going to be our display and also be the thing that we put tunes onto. In this application, we are going to get custom tunes. We're doing a coolant bypass. This is to help keep the oil cooler clean and just keep the coolant clean overall. That way we can have larger intervals. And of course, that comes with a nice Donaldson filter. So we've also got a regulated return fuel system. So the reason we're going to be doing this is for an injector longevity. This is going to help keep the injectors alive longer. What it does is it helps the fuel, instead of getting deadheaded between the 7 and 8 cylinders at the very back of the heads, it allows it to circulate through. It doesn't allow the fuel to get superheated, keeps the injectors alive longer, keeps the injectors cool. So it also provides better regulating capability than the factory had. And then of course we've just got our MOLLE head gasket set and our cylinder heads, so let's get to work. Okay, what we need to do first is get our heads ready to go. It's a lot easier to do that with the exhaust manifolds on, so we're going to bolt those on. And then for you guys that aren't doing a regulated return, don't forget to put your your fuel rail plug in. So whether that's on the front side or the back side, there really isn't a side to the head. They're both universal to either side. So just make sure you're putting it on the back of the head. Here we do have exhaust manifold gaskets that come in your MOLLE kit. These originally didn't come from Ford. They didn't come with gaskets here, so this is a really nice little upgrade. These do torque to 20 foot-pounds, but I've got a pretty good feel for it for that length of ratchet. So a lot of you have probably noticed that these exhaust manifolds are very black. So I do have the option to Cerakote these easily, so I did that here. But if you guys want these manifolds to not be all rusted and gross looking, you just grab some barbecue paint and they actually make them look really nicely as well. So what I'm doing here is I'm actually giving myself a good ground, because this is where the ground strap goes. Okay, that's pretty much it for these heads. We're ready to put them back on. Alrighty guys, there really isn't much to prepping the surfaces. I just use a razor blade. If it's really pitted and bad, sometimes I'll use a wire wheel if the surface is not. But I'll just use a razor blade, screen everything off. This is what my machine shop has also recommended. Do not use one of those roll-lock, Scotch-Brite pad looking deals. They actually eat into the material and they can cause high and low spots. Okay, the point I want to make here is that shiny doesn't mean flat. We need to make sure, the reason we're just using a razor blade or a wire wheel is what we need into the surface. So we just want it to be flat. Flat and clean of any material that's going to flake off. And so you see that I spent a lot of time in between the cylinders. That's where you probably need to spend a lot of your time, but just make sure that your surfaces are flat. Even if you can still feel a little bit of a rise with your fingertips, it's not that big of a deal. If your razor blade isn't going to cut it or take off any more material, like you can see here, it doesn't take off any more material, you're ready to put your heads on. Okay, there is no real particular way to put the head gaskets on. They're universal, they go on either side, so let's just make sure we get our dowels in. And then we'll go ahead and set our gaskets on. And you can see here, I actually don't have them lined up. My hole is there for the block, and my hole right there is the gasket. I'm just gonna flip this one over. Alrighty, now we're all good to go. Let's get our head on. Okay, the heads will sit here while you grab bolts, but just make sure you don't leave them too long. Okay, here's what I do, guys. I smear a little bit of that lube that they provide just on the top part of the threads, bottom part of the threads very near the bottom. That way when you're screwing it in, it screws up to the thread. And then we'll provide more lube when we go to put our washers and nuts on. Okay, what I like to do is grab a little bit of assembly lube and just place it on each one of the stems for the valves. And that way when you put your bridges on, you've already got plenty of lubrication. Just until oil gets there. Okay, what you want to do next is put your bridges on. So what I always do, you'll see that there are two sizes to the bridge, an oblong side and a circle side. So I always put the circle side up. But I really don't know if there's a real particular reason for that. And then I'll grab our assembly lube and I'll place it right here, right where the rocker arm actually hits the bridge. We're going to install our push rods. So I'll do the exact same thing with these. I'll just put a little bit of grease on either side of them. Except for with these, I'll do it with the bundle. We are ready for the rocker box. Okay, one of the things I want to point out here is we need to not forget this gasket and make sure you replace it because it seems to be a huge leak on these dang trucks. So let's get that installed. Okay, the rocker box isn't going to sit totally flat because the rockers are going to be pushing up on the valves, and so you're going to need to get some pressure on them to seat everything. Okay, so what we're going to do, we're going to take our washers, we're going to put them in a little bit of assembly lube, you're just going to coat them on both sides, just like that, and then just place them on. Okay, next we'll just run them down with the impact, just a little 1/4 inch drive one, and then we'll do our torque sequence. Alrighty guys, now to actually get down to torquing these things. So the sequence is 90, 150, 220. So the way you want to do it is you're just going to work from the center and work your way out. So pretty straightforward, just do. I mean, it's not a big deal on these. It's not like an actual torque sequence. You just need to work from the center, work your way out. So we'll start. This is when you want to have a couple of friends that are strong, because 220 foot-pounds is not an easy number to reach. Alrighty, 150. Okay, the next thing we're going to do is we're going to install our injectors. We want to make sure to put some oil on these injector O-rings. Even this one for the electrical connector just makes it easier to go in. But you want to make sure you replace all of these O-rings if you're reusing your injectors. They do come in the kit. They're not easy to replace. You do have to have a little bit of patience. Everything does come apart, you just have a little bit of patience. So make sure that these are well lubricated with a little bit of oil, and then we'll just set all of them in place, and then the holders actually pull them down into the head. Okay, these nuts, bolts do have a torque spec. They're 27 foot-pounds. It is a pretty critical torque on these. You can over-torque the injectors and it'll cause the nozzle to not seat correctly. It can cause leaks. The bracket itself can break. So just make sure that you're really careful on the torque on these. Alrighty guys, I forgot to do something. I forgot these bolts right here. I also forgot all of these. We gotta get all those installed before we finish the injector install. These bolts do torque to 35 foot-pounds. Next, we can put our glow plugs in. We're going to be trying out this brand from Diesel RX, see how they do. We've been watching a lot of videos on it, and they actually show that they effectively heat the glow plug a little bit more efficiently than the factory ones do, or the aftermarket does. We do live in a fairly cold climate, so glow plugs are pretty critical.
Oh, it even gave you a line power, part number, and serial number. Is there a magnet in here?
I think it's in this one.
I may or may not have dropped the
Razor blade.
razor blade. We should try and put... Because I don't think
Did you grab glow harnesses?
Huh?
Did you pick up glow harnesses?
Yep.
Okay, where are they?
Back to it. One to Dorman, one...
Okay, one of the biggest things with glow plug harnesses is these things just get stuck. They won't come out, they break off. So what I always do is I put a liberal amount of anti-seize on the O-rings. So that way, if you do have an issue, you can just pop them out in the future. I actually did this on my truck about 5 years ago, and I had to do glow plugs on it recently, and they really just came out easy, no problem at all. Whereas when I first did glow plugs on that truck, I think it took me 4 hours to do my glow plugs. And these harnesses aren't exactly cheap. They're about $80 to $100 a piece. Okay guys, the next thing we need to install is our oil rail. And you can see this one's not so pretty, it's a little rust covered. This truck's sat a long time. This will happen to most of them that sit a bunch, is they'll rust up on top. It's not a big deal, just clean it off. So what we're gonna do is you wanna be very, very careful of these little nipples down here. So they need to go in each one of these injectors, and you wanna make sure you lubricate them with some type of oil or something before you put them in. The most common high pressure oil leak on these trucks is actually these injectors. And this O-ring is a pain in the butt to replace. So on average takes me 20 to 30 minutes to get each one replaced. So make sure you're really careful on this step. But yeah, so we'll just slip this on here. Like that. And then we'll get all of our hardware in. And then we'll put this stand pipe in. This only torques to like 35 foot-pounds. It's a 10mm Allen. And then these are like 92 inch-pounds, quite honestly. I just do them to where I know where I'm at. But 92, it's 89 inch-pounds on those bolts. Okay guys, finishing touch, putting the valve cover on after I go grab a gasket. Now putting the valve cover on. Okay, one of the things we have to keep in mind is where this bracket goes. This is for the glow plug controller. So it's gonna sit just like this. So we need a stud, pretty much a stud in every one of the front bolts. We also need a stud for the dipstick for the transmission. Everything else should just be a bolt. Okay, everybody, I just want you to pay attention. I am not putting very much torque on these. I think these are 89 inch-pounds. It might even be less than that. I'm just making them snug. I have known of so many people that have stripped these out. Just take your time. Don't strip one out, please. It is just going into aluminum. Alrighty, this side, as far as this part goes, is done. We're gonna move the camera over to Lonnon's side. He's gonna finish up his side. Alrighty guys, so we're gonna get started on this side. I'm not really gonna talk you through it because we already did it on that side. Everything's exactly the same. So I'm just gonna slap this side together. Hey everybody. Okay, so we're gonna get this turbo installed. We're gonna do that. We're gonna get our up pipes on, and then that'll pretty much complete the back half of this truck. Don't forget this heat shield. So we'll get all that put on. Most of these bolts are 18 foot-pounds. Actually, all of them are 18 foot-pounds. Quite honestly, I've never put a torque wrench on one of them ever. I just do it by hand. Oh, beautiful little power bags. Just so you guys know, there are no gaskets. You want to keep these pretty loose because we are going to have to adjust it here. That way it bolts up to the turbo perfectly. Okay, so here you see we have our clamp. So we just need to pull that out of the way enough to get it in here. We'll kind of wrap it around the two. And then slip it together. So what I always do is I'm trying to look out for myself if I have to take this thing back apart. So you want to be able to get to it from the cab. So that's usually just above where the solenoid is at, coming right out here. So try and have the end of it pointing out there so that we can actually get to it when the cab's back on. And not do what the factory did and have it spun around backwards. Of course, always check to make sure everything's tight by hand. You can't, I mean, for the most part, you get a feel for your power tools, but you never know when the batteries are actually dying. So, just do yourself a favor and check. And guys, I know you probably can see just how nice this looks. It is so much better in person. This coating is so nice, and they look so great. The bellows look great. Like, MBRP did a fantastic job on these up pipes. I'm very impressed. Alrighty, and that's it for our turbo install. There's really not a lot to it on this side of it. We're also going to get our exhaust installed, so that way you guys can see the downpipe and all that go on. And then, for the most part, it's going to be setting our cab back down here really soon. Alright, so as you guys can see, we've buttoned up the front of it for the most part. I still haven't installed the belts. So we actually, trying to get the fan off of it, we ended up breaking this pulley off, which ended up breaking the front cover. Fortunately, I have a parts engine, and this is my brother's truck, so I just pulled it off with a parts engine. So if you're in here, don't start wailing on this with a hammer, or else you might break a pulley off. But, so I ended up replacing the front cover. And so I'm just going to get the belts on, and we should be ready to run as far as the front end goes. We'll get the new belt on and the new fan on, and then it's just finishing up the little things. Hey guys, so we've got our 50 horsepower, well, actually a 40 horsepower Atlas tune. We get our Ficums from ficumfixer.com. They've been really, really good to work with. They're very, very quick. They're actually better priced than most of their competition. I've been running their stuff for a couple of years now on a couple of buddies' trucks. We have had a warranty issue in the past, and they were extremely fast to fix it. And so they are a very, very good company. I highly recommend them. And their name is Ficum Fixer again. Oh, another thing with this Atlas tune. So, or Power Hungry tune, everybody has their names for them. The 40 horsepower tune is actually a bump of what they actually do with the Ficums themselves. You can do a 40, an 80, or 100. This is going to be a tow pig, so we figured a 40 is just fine. I've been running a 40 for years, I mean 7 years now, and it's been great. The EGTs aren't excessive. My brother, on the other hand, has 100 on his Excursion, and it gets with it. It lays down some fuel, but its EGTs get pretty extreme sometimes, so be aware of that. For a lot of you guys, your clips are going to be broken on the back of the pickup here. And so one of the things you might try giving a shot before you go buy a new harness or whatever it may be, put a piece of 5/8 heater hose right on top of the valve cover, on top of those two bolts, to span the plugs. I've actually learned that that holds them in better than the clips themselves, and you generally can save yourself a lot of money doing that.
All right, guys, next thing we're gonna do, we are drilling and tapping for our EGT probe. If the truck cab is off, it's probably easiest right here in the corner. If you're doing it without the cab off, which for what we did is gonna be pretty much a nightmare, you're gonna come kind of underneath as much straight as you can up into here. If you've got a right angle drill, that'll probably make it easier.
Alright, since we got the dual alternator set up, we're running this little rinky-dink one. I'm not sure if this is exactly what it's supposed to have, but this is what I have. So, and there went the exhaust. These are standard rotation. Okay, now this piece right here, if it doesn't stay, the clip is broken, I will grab a zip tie and wrap it around it, just because I actually just lost this recently on my own pickup. I was climbing a mountain out of Logan and noticed my truck overheating, and it's never done that before. And it actually had ripped this pigtail into the harness and ripped all the wires out of it. And very, very common failure. Alrighty guys, do you want to see the difference between a non-dual alternator fan shroud and a dual alternator fan shroud? Single alternator covers the whole thing. I tried to install this because I thought his was broken. And I grabbed his and realized that those cuts actually look factory, and everything here looks factory. And it's just this little third of a circle. It's a lot smaller. Okay, we're finally getting around to getting the exhaust on. I know it's been a long time coming. I mentioned it like 5 times in this video. Finally getting to it. So we've got a couple pieces of this downpipe. It's a 2-piece. So the one piece is going to slip into this piece here. Then that's going to go along the frame. And just watch me do it. Hey everybody, so while Lonnon's getting his wire loom fixed, I found out on the exhaust I can't necessarily install it right now because all the rubber hangers are missing, so I'm going to rob those off of a parts truck. So I'm going to get this thing ready for the cab to come back down. So just going to get all these pieces that are hanging off back on the engine. A lot of what I'm doing is trying to weave things together so they fit super tight against the block. The AC lines always want to fight you, so you can wrap things around them to pull them in, the better you'll be. You also want to avoid putting anything back here, because this is right where the cowl's at, and so you can't usually get it. Try and wrap everything up top and in the front. So over here there's a little vacuum line. This is for your vacuum operated hubs. Don't forget about it. I almost did. Okay, you can't see this, but make sure that none of the electrical lines that run down into your frame rail
are flopped over to the outside of the frame rail near the tire, because they'll get pinched in between the body and the frame, and now you're lifting your body back up. And I usually just set them all down on the ground. Alrighty guys, that's pretty much it for getting these stuff wrapped up here. Lonnon's almost done. Like, we're almost gonna set this body down. Finally, it's coming down after what feels like an eternity.
A fully turned, not even half of it.
Yeah, it's been a long time.
Long time coming, need to go forward.
Okay guys, definitely best to have 2 people right now. Keep coming.
No, hang on.
So the waiting game continues, waiting for batteries to charge and prime the oiling system. So what we're doing here is we'll run the starter for about 10 seconds.
How are you doing?
And then, so the way we do it is you can actually pull Griff show on the starter cable. So I'll show them where it plugs into the firewall. So it's that plug right back there. It's a round plug, only one on that side of the fender. And what I do is I just run it over to the battery lead and just jump it. You don't want to do this with the key because you don't want to inject a bunch of diesel into the system and it just drains the battery faster. So this is one of those times you have to have a battery charger. You've got to do this. We're probably going to do it about 20 times because the oil rails are totally empty, the high pressure pump is empty, oil cooler is empty. All of this stuff has to have oil to operate, and so it takes a lot of time to get that oil system bled through the system. So it has to be done every time you do an injector, but it's really bad when you do this much work. So it's going to take a minute. Alrighty guys, so that was pretty much it. I mean, this truck has been really good for the last month. I'm sorry they had this gap in here, but this allowed you to see that, hey, we still have things we're working out with this thing. It does have 305,000 miles on it, but he's put several thousand miles on it since we did the initial build. And so it shows that this is something that you can do if you've got a buddy with a lift or a shop that can do that type of work or something you can figure out there. This is a very doable project, so long as you have enough time, enough patience, and you have good instruction to watch. This truck's been fantastic. We paid $4,500 for this thing, and it'll tow anything. So we'll see you in the next one.